Let me ask you something before we even get started today. Think about the last conversation that you had, like a real one, not small talk in a hallway, not a quick text exchange, an actual conversation with another human being. Now ask yourself honestly, what were you doing while they were talking? Were you listening or were you waiting? Waiting to respond, waiting to redirect, waiting to figure out what this conversation was going to cost you or give you. If you're being honest, and I'm being honest about myself here too, a lot of us spend time, most of our time even, in conversations not actually present in them. While the other person is talking, we are calculating. And I want to talk today about where that comes from, because I don't just think it's a personal habit. I think it's something we've been trained to do by systems much bigger than ourselves. So I am Pastor Andrew Shipley of Missiongathering Christian Church, Charlotte, and welcome back to our Lenten series, Unlearning Empire. Let's get into it. So today we're sitting with a story from John chapter 4, right? And you've probably heard this story before. It's Jesus at a well and a woman he shouldn't be talking to, and a conversation that shouldn't have happened. But underneath all of it all is a question. And it's a question that I think is one of the most important questions we can ask ourselves right now as we're seeking to unlearn empire and to learn the ways of the kingdom. Is that, are we encountering people or are we just extracting from them? Because here's something nobody announces out loud, right? But most of us have completely absorbed this into our way of being, our understanding, our ideas, is that people are resources, not in some cartoon villainy way, not cruelly, not consciously, but quietly and constantly in our minds, right? We measure relationships by what they produce. We evaluate friendships by how useful they are. We walk into rooms already calculating who here is worth my time, who can advance my goals, and who do I need to know? We call it nice things like networking. We call it strategy. We call it being smart about our energy, of guarding our time. But underneath all of those like clickbait titles and armchair psychology, life coach things is underneath all of that, it's behind those polite names is something a little darker, a little more devious, a little more harmful. It's extraction. And extraction has a very specific logic. It takes a person, a full, complicated, irreducible human being, and shrinks them down into their function. What do you do for me? What do you offer? How do you serve my goals? Now here's what I want you and I to sit with. That isn't just a personal problem. Like, this isn't just a calling you out thing or calling me out thing. That's empire. Empire doesn't just exist in governments and armies. Empire is a logic, a way of organizing the world. And the logic of empire is this: everything and everyone exists to be used to serve the empire. The land exists for all of its resources to be extracted. The labor exists for that to be extracted. Communities exist for them to be extracted from. And we live inside these systems for so long enough to start to treat each other in the exact same way. We optimize our friendships. We curate our availability. We manage conversations towards outcomes. But in all that, we genuinely forget that there's another way to be with people. that extraction or seeing what we can get out of the relationship isn't the only way to be with people. There's another way to be, and that way is called encounter. Encounter is not a transaction. Encounter doesn't begin with what can I get from this? It begins with something much harder and much more dangerous. It begins with the question, who are you? Extraction moves fast, efficiently. Encounter slows down. Extraction simplifies, and encounter allows complexity. Extraction arrives with conclusions already made. Encounter arrives with curiosity. And to encounter someone, to really encounter them, you have to be willing to be surprised by them. You have to let them remain a mystery instead of turning them into a project. Friends, that's genuinely countercultural right now. And I think the story of Jesus at the well shows us exactly what that looks like. So let me set the scene. John tells us it's noon, the hottest part of the day. The sun is directly above them, beating down. Everybody's kind of gone inside. Nobody's out at that hour by choice. If you ever lived somewhere that's really hot and there's no air conditioning, this is the time of day where you're staying put. You're not going out to this well, but Jesus is tired from traveling. His disciples have gone into town to find food, and he sits down by this well. And while he's out there, there's no crowd, there's no sermon, there's no audience. He's just at a well in the middle of the day in Samaria, which for a Jewish man at this time is already the wrong place to be. And a woman, just a single one woman, she comes up to draw water. Now, everything about this moment is loaded. She's a Samaritan, right? It's a group that Jewish people in this era considered half-breeds at best, enemies at worst. It was a family infighting that they were having. And she's a woman in a time that's so patriarchal, it already means that this conversation is not supposed to happen in public without a chaperone being present. But she's here, and she's here at noon. And that should tell us something. Scholars have pointed out that this probably means she's been pushed to the margins even within her own community. She's coming to this well at an hour that no one else in their right mind will be coming to this well. No one else is around. She's by herself. She's avoiding the same jeers and questions and stories and snickering. And this is where Jesus sits down. He doesn't position himself above her. He doesn't launch into a teaching. He doesn't pull out a scroll and start reading to her from it. He sits. He waits. He's tired, and he just waits. In a world shaped by urgency, by the need to be productive with every part of every hour of our day, waiting is a resistance, a way of pushing back. And by doing that, he's already refusing the logic of extraction. He didn't come to harvest a convert. He didn't come to win a theological argument. He's just there. And then he does something that I think is one of the most radical things in the entire gospel. The entire gospel of John, this is probably one of the most radical moments. He asks her for something. He says, "Give me a drink." Think about that for a second, though. He's a Jewish man. He's a rabbi. He's a teacher. She's a Samaritan woman at the margins of her own community. And he places himself in need. He makes himself dependent on her. He asks. See, Empire maintains control by never needing the margins, by never making the margins know how much they need them. Putting up this false dichotomy where they're above and other people are below. But Jesus begins by depending on those in the margins. He doesn't take the water. He doesn't bypass her and reach into the well for himself. He asks her. He needs her. And asking is something we don't think enough about, is it? I mean, think about it. Asking honors someone else's agency because they can say no. Asking acknowledges their dignity because it says that you need their input in the situation, that they're important. Asking says, I cannot complete this moment without you. I think one of the biggest differences between the God that Jesus models to us is that empire takes, and God asks. When was the last time you asked instead of just taking? When was the last time you truly and genuinely made yourself dependent on someone your world told you was beneath you? So back to the story, the conversation begins to deepen between Jesus and this woman. She pushes back. She's not passive at all. She calls him out immediately. She says, you are a Jew and I am a Samaritan. Why are you asking me for anything? Jesus has already disrupted her day, right? Like she was coming there by herself to be alone. And here's this guy like asking her stuff that should not be asked. And yet Jesus doesn't flinch. He doesn't correct her. He doesn't pull rank. He leans in a way that only Jesus can gently lean in. And they go back and forth about water, about thirst, about something deeper than either. And eventually Jesus names something about her life, her history, her relationships. And here's where I want to slow down for a moment because I grew up with this story and you grew up with this story too. Because this moment in this story trips people up. Some people read this and think Jesus is exposing this woman, shaming her, catching her in something, being like, aha, I know what you did. But look at what he actually does. He names what she already knows, her own truth spoken back to her, not as an accusation, but as recognition. That's why she's so excited that here's a man who's told me everything I ever did. There's a difference between being exposed and being seen. Exposure uses your story against you as a weapon, as a means to put you down. But being seen means someone has looked at your story and they've recognized you in it. Extraction takes people's stories and turns them into data, turns them into sermon illustrations, statistics, leverage, talking points for pundits. Something to be managed or pitied or studied or used against people. But encounter, this idea of encounter that we're talking about, this way of unlearning empire, receives someone's story as a sacred trust. She's not reduced to her past in this conversation. She's not frozen in her pain. She's not labeled by her worst moments, her most complicated relationships. She's not made the identified patient that only Jesus can save. She's seen by Jesus. And being seen without being used, that is transformation. That's transformative. Think about the people in your world who are talked about but never talked with. You know who it is. It comes to mind immediately. Communities that are studied, managed, served, but never actually encountered. I see this happen all the time in churches. All the time, right? The church, we can run programs for people. We can design outreach at people. We can craft messaging toward people. But do we sit with them? Do we ask them things? Do we let them surprise us? You see, unlearning empire means giving up the right to narrate someone else's life for them. And as the church, we've done that so much. So here's what happens at the end of the story at the well that I don't want us to miss. The woman is so excited being seen by Jesus, so excited for the way that Jesus treated and talked to her. The woman leaves her water jar. She came to the well for water. That was the whole point. She came at the worst part of the day because she needed water and didn't want to be harassed by the rest of the people in town. Basic survival, physical necessity. She leaves it behind. And she goes back into a community that, based on what we can piece together, hasn't exactly been welcoming to her. She goes back and tells people, come and see this man, come and see what just happened to me. She becomes a witness to the gospel in Samaria. Not because Jesus extracted testimony from her, not because he signed her up for a role, not because he optimized her for outreach. She becomes a witness because encounter created freedom in her. And that's what empire can never manufacture. Empire can mobilize people, empire can market, it can create campaigns and movements, it can fight wars, it can have very well-funded initiatives. But only seeing people for who they are creates witness, like that woman's witness. When someone has been truly seen, when they've been met at the well of their own hearts in the heat of the day, in the worst parts of their life, in the part of their life that they don't bring into polite company, when someone's been truly seen there, seen without flinching, something shifts. A shift that can't be controlled. And that's what scares empire about it. Because transformation born of this type of encounter, transformation born of this way of seeing people, moves on its own. Or better said, moves with the Spirit. And no one controls where the Spirit goes. So here we are in Lent, right? And what do we do with this? And I want to take a moment here to name something honestly. What I'm talking about here is not just about being nicer in conversations. It's not about being more polite. This is not a self-help reframe about active listening. What we're talking about here is a real spiritual discipline, a real spiritual practice, and it's one of the hardest ones. Because real listening, requires you to lay something down in order to do it. You have to lay down your own expertise and ego, your certainty, your need to fix a problem before they finish the sentence, your habit of ranking the person while they're talking, your impulse to redirect towards something more comfortable. In church, you see that so often as somebody being like, well, let's pray about it. To try and get someone off of telling that story that makes you squirm, that you don't want to listen to. This discipline, this practice of really listening, of encountering other people, means that you have to listen long enough that another person surprises you. And that takes genuine discipline in our world. I think we need to start naming it as that, not as just a communication skill, not as a practice of resist, but as a practice, as a discipline against extraction. So let me ask you more directly. Where is it in your life? Where have you slipped into that extraction mode? Where are you measuring relationships by what they produce? And where are you approaching people already decided about who they are and what they're for? Where might you need to ask in your life instead of taking? Or those spaces where you just grab stuff instead of taking it, why don't you ask? Where do you need to listen instead of trying to manage someone? Encounter instead of just process. And listen, friends, this is not about self-condemnation. I want to be clear about that. This is about freedom because I know something about you. You're tired because extraction, this way that we do things, is exhausting. It's genuinely exhausting to move through the world constantly calculating, constantly optimizing, constantly needing to be the strong one in every room. When you lay that down, when you begin to unlearn that, this idea of encountering another person frees both people, the one being encountered and the one encountering. The woman at the well didn't just walk away transformed. I think that Jesus did too. That's what encounter does. It moves in both directions. I think that God is willing to meet us at our wells, not in the places that we've cleaned up and prepared, not in the moments we've scheduled and rehearsed, in deserts, in wells, at tables, in conversations we didn't plan, in the interruptions that we didn't budget time for. That person you're encountering, person coming up to you is Jesus still asking. Jesus still asks not because he's weak, but because encounter requires humility. Because real relationship cannot be built on taking. Empire turns people into resources. But Jesus always turns towards people as neighbors. Empire extracts, and Jesus encounters. And the invitation of this story for us today, in a world that we're actually living in, is to try imperfectly and repeatedly to do the same thing, to ask instead of take, to listen instead of manage, to show up at the well and let yourself be surprised by who you find there. May you continue this process, this journey of unlearning empire and becoming full citizens of the kingdom that Jesus preached. Amen. May it be so.